Where we are standing here, give or take 5 or 6 feet, this is exactly where the body was. He was never caught, and he did indeed get away with all the horrible things that he did.
After all your years of research, you think you know who Jack the Ripper is?
I'm convinced it's him personally.
Can you tell me what he dressed like?
He's animal.
This is crazy.
Of all the serial killers, there's only a small percentage of these people who are really as nasty and violent and graphic as Jack the Ripper was.
All right, man. Well, I'm rolling whenever you're ready.
Do you want me to introduce myself as well?
Yep.
Okay. Am I doing a hey guys, or am I just going straight in?
Give us a hey, guys.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Mick Priestley. I'm the author of Jack the Ripper, One Autumn in Whitechapel, and I'm a tour guide and historian here in central London. For the last number of years, I've been also guiding the Jack the Ripper tour here in Whitechapel, which is where we are standing right now. Whitechapel here in the East End of London is notorious, if you like, for 3 things in particular. The Blitz in the Second World War, the Cray twins, who were gangsters in the 1960s, and the Jack the Ripper case that took place in this exact area in 1888. Back in those days, though, this area was considerably different to what it is now. Back in those days, there was no benefit system, there was no minimum wage, there was no basic living conditions like you would expect today. This area was very much a slum. There were 2 notorious slums in London at the time. One of them was the Seven Dials area, which is now the theatre area out in Covent Garden in the West End of London. And here in the Whitechapel and Spitalfields area, times were extremely hard. And for a lot of people, destitution was a constant threat. Homelessness, alcoholism, drug problems were rife. This was not the sort of place you wanted to be. When the Jack the Ripper case began, for a lot of people, it was simply one more threat in the slums here, and it was just something else that they had to contend with. The Jack the Ripper case actually began on the 7th of August, 1888, with the murder of a woman called Martha Tabram, who was 39 years old and was found stabbed to death on the first floor of a lodging house in Gunthorpe Street, which was called George Yard at the time. It's real near the Aldgate East tube station of Whitechapel High Street. Martha Tabram was found on the first floor of the George Yard building, on her back with both hands by her sides, her legs wide apart, her clothes pulled up chest high, like other victims would later be found, and she'd been stabbed 39 times. 9 of those stab wounds were to the throat, 9 were between the legs. There were a number of stab wounds on her chest that the doctor said were in an almost circular pattern. At the time, that created a bit of a story in the newspapers, a horrible murder in the slums. It wasn't really making that big of a wave in the newspapers. But then we had the murder of Ann Nichols on the 31st of August 1888. The murder actually took place right here where we're standing now. She was found here lying on her back like Martha Tabram with both hands by her sides, her legs wide apart, her clothes pulled up, her throat had been cut twice very deeply, almost severing her spinal column. She had a number of bruises to her jaw that might have been considered to be a strangling injury. But when they got the body to the mortuary, they realised that her abdomen had been mutilated to such a degree that the intestines were exposed through the wounds. That made a big deal in the newspapers. It was 3:40 in the morning that it happened. She'd last been seen alive drinking in the Frying Pan pub on Brick Lane at about 1:30 that morning, before the murder was then discovered at 3:40 here on Bucks Row. She was first found by a guy called Charles Cross, who would later turn out might actually have been called Charles Lechmere. He was walking to work at 3:40 in the morning when he found her lying here in the street, but it was that dark he thought originally that this object on the path was a rolled up sheet or an old carpet or something. He walked across the road, discovered it was a woman lying there, turned around. There was a guy walking up the street behind him called Robert Paul. Never met the guy before. He said, "Hey, come and have a look at this. There's a woman lying on the path here." They got there, realised her clothes were pulled chest high, legs wide apart, but it was so dark that they failed to realise she'd been murdered. They made their way on to Valence Road, which was actually called Baker's Row, the bottom part of it at the time, where they met a police officer called Jonas Misen, alerted him to the situation. He came down here to this spot, found her lying in the street, and the case then began. Newspapers were going wild with the story of Ann Nichols, especially after the murder of Martha Tabram 3 weeks before, but it was only 8 days after that murder that the murder of Annie Chapman took place in the rear yard of number 29 Hanbury Street, only a short distance away in Spitalfields. Annie Chapman was found at about 5:45 that morning. A man named John Davis who lived on the top floor of number 29. He woke up, he had a cup of tea apparently for about 10 minutes. Then he came down the stairs to use the only toilet, which was an outhouse in the back right corner of the yard. He headed down the stairs, noticing the front door of the building was standing wide open and was against the wall, which is very unusual. He headed through the back door, he opened it outwards and to the left, and discovered the horribly mutilated body of Annie Chapman lying in the bottom of a few steps, in between the steps and the fence. Like Ann Nichols and Martha Tabram before, she was lying on her back with her head to the side, her eyes were wide open. This time, one hand had been placed across her chest, her legs were wide apart, her clothes pulled up chest high, but she'd been very heavily mutilated. Her abdomen had been cut open, her intestines pulled from inside her and placed across her right shoulder. The contents of her pockets had been displayed in a ritualistic kind of fashion at her feet. The killer had actually smeared the blood from a throat wound across the inside of her thighs, across the fence. That was a big deal in the newspapers at the time. People in Whitechapel were now aware that somebody was murdering the streetwalkers in the area at night time, and the hunt was on to find him. There was a 3-week gap after that, though, before the double murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes that took place on Saturday, the 30th of September 1888. Elizabeth Stride was the first one to be found at about 1:01 in Dutfield's yard on Berners Street, which is now called Hanbury Street. It's only a short distance from here. She was found in Dutfield's yard at about 1:01 by a 26-year-old man called Louis Deemschutz, who lived and worked next door to the yard in a working men's club. It was called the International Working Men's Educational Society. It was a predominantly Jewish working men's club. He'd been away with his pony and cart during the day, selling cheap jewellery off the back of his pony and cart down at Westow Market in Crystal Palace. He arrived back into the yard, and on rolling in the dark, the pony stopped, shied to the left, backed up and refused to go anywhere near the right-hand wall. He got off from where he was, he lit a match to see what the holdup was and discovered that there was a woman lying on the floor. He went into the side door of the building, which was still open at the time. There were guys in there playing piano and drinking beers and singing songs. He got somebody to come out with a lamp and they realised that the killer had struck again. She was found on her back, like Annie Chapman, with one hand across her chest. The killer had removed a hat from her head and placed it on the ground behind her. He'd scattered a packet of breath mints around her in the yard and placed what remained of the packet into her left hand, then had taken off running without performing his mutilations. Only around 45 minutes later, though, the murder of Catherine Eddowes was then discovered in Mitre Square, only a 12-minute walk, roughly west of the Dutfield yard crime scene. And that one was the most violent and most disturbing of the series so far. Catherine in Mitre Square was lying in the south corner of the square with her legs wide apart, both hands by her sides like Ann Nichols and Annie Chapman. The killer had pulled her clothes chest high and mutilated her to a worse extent than any of the victims up to that point. Her intestines had actually been pulled from inside her and stuffed into a throat wound. He'd removed a 2.5-foot section of her colon from inside her body, placed it on the ground in between her left arm and her side. The killer had actually cut her face with a number of stab and slash injuries, removing the bottom part of her right ear, removing the front of her nose, splitting both sets of her eyelids. He then removed her left kidney and a womb, torn off a big part of an apron she was wearing, seemingly to wrap these organs in, and had taken off from the crime scene and was gone again. The missing part of her apron, though, would later be found in the doorway of 108 to 119 Wentworth dwellings, only a short distance away on Goulston Street. It was found by a PC Alfred Long about an hour and a half after the murder took place, lying inside the doorway on the right-hand side, but there was some cryptic chalk graffiti written on the wall next to where the apron was laying that said, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," with a strange misspelling of the word Jews. Maybe the killer wrote it, maybe he didn't. The police weren't entirely sure at the time, but the missing part of her apron found in the doorway of 108 to 119 is the only point in the case where the killer would leave a clue like that. After that, though, there's a 6-week gap between the double murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes before the murder of Mary Kelly then took place in Dorset Street in Spitalfields in a place called Miller's Court. Mary Kelly lived in number 13 Miller's Court, which is a horrible slum room that she was renting from a man named John McCarthy. She was found at 10:30 in the morning by a guy called Thomas Boyer, who was John McCarthy, the landlord's assistant. He was heading down to a room to collect the rent money. He went down, banged on the door. There was no answer. Tried the door. It was locked. So he went round to the side where there was a broken window pane, put his hand through the window, pulled back a coat on the inside that was being used as a curtain, and on looking into the room, discovered the horribly mutilated body of Mary Kelly lying on the bed inside. This one was the worst of the Jack the Ripper series. The police believe that the killer might have been there at that scene for about 2 hours, which is considerably longer than the 3, 4, 5 minutes he was believed to have spent at any of his crime scenes in the street. Mary Kelly was found extremely heavily mutilated. Both of her thighs had been denuded, the police said, stripped of flesh down to the bone. The flesh taken off in that process was actually lying on the bedside table next to her head. Both of her breasts had been removed. Her liver was lying in between her feet. Her intestines were placed across her right shoulder. The majority of her face had actually been removed. The original police report said that when they got into the room, organs from inside her body had been draped over the back of the chairs and were actually hanging from nails inside on the wall. Also, her heart was missing from the crime scene, but her ribs had not been broken. That means at that particular crime scene, whoever the killer was, he really did put his hand underneath her rib cage, ripped out her heart, and if he didn't eat it at the crime scene, which could be something in a modern case that would expect the killer might have done, if he didn't do that, he put it in his pocket and he took it home with him. Most people say at that point, after the 9th of November murder of Mary Kelly, people often think that the murders stopped, but they didn't. On the 17th of July, 1889, 39-year-old Alice Mackenzie was found murdered and mutilated in Old Castle Street, which is the street immediately behind the Goulston Street doorway that was absolutely attributed to the killer at the time. Then, on the 13th of February 1891, 26-year-old Frances Coles was found murdered in a railway arch called Swallow Gardens beside the Tower of London, which is only a short walk from the Whitechapel area. After that, though, the killer really does seem to disappear. Some people think he may have died, moved away, gone to prison, but I always kind of thought personally that if he didn't die for some reason as a young man, he could have stayed living in this same area. He could have lived through the Second World War. Nobody ever imagines Jack the Ripper dodging bombs in the Blitz. He'd have been about 80 years old at the time. I always thought he probably stayed living in this area, but whoever he was never caught, and he did indeed get away with all the horrible things that he did. Is that all right? Or, I'm just totally winging that there.
Man, that was really good. That's so crazy.
I mean, it's wild.
Thing. You think about crimes that people commit of like they just like kill someone, like run away, like a hit and run accident. But the fact that this guy is just like destroying people's bodies in the middle of like an alleyway and then just like going back home like nothing happens, or starting another murder, not being able to finish it, and then just going right up the street to murder another person. I mean, that's absolutely mental.
So why the mutilations? Why do you think he mutilated?
In a modern case, I think at the time they weren't necessarily sure. The police were, and the police and the doctors were actually more ahead of the time than they're often given credit for now. Today, though, they would say that his whole motivation for doing this is the mutilating. They would call it piquerism in a modern case. So we're getting a bit heavy with that. Piquerism is the desire to penetrate the skin. So you'd think if he just murdered somebody, run away, but he doesn't. The whole point of murdering you is he gets to do this mutilating, kind of like Jeffrey Dahmer or Richard Chase, who was a Sacramento vampire in California in the 70s. Doing the murder isn't good enough. He feels the need to act out these mutilations in order to get his satisfaction, to get his psychological gratification from the crime scene. So he commits the murder. He hangs around doing this for as long as he feels comfortable before he really feels he has to flee. But just before he leaves, all of the victims are found on the back, head to the side, usually with a hand across the chest, objects arranged around them, legs apart, clothes pulled up, hat taken off the heads, placed on the ground behind them. He poses the victims before he leaves. In a modern case, we'll call that the killer's signature. Something that he has seen or read about or heard about excites him, and after years of thinking and fantasizing about it, he has a very complicated fantasy that he feels compelled to act out at the crime scene in order to get the greatest gratification from his offense. Yeah, where we are standing here, give or take 5 or 6 feet, this is exactly where the body was. Right here, we have the bridge over the train line, which when the police turned up and found the body here, there was a theory that he might have jumped over onto the train line to make his escape. This row of houses here is different now. I think bits of it got bombed in the war. Bits of it were cleared in the slum clearance in the 1920s. This used to be a building called New Cottage standing here on the end. And she was found in the doorway of the stables yard that stood exactly here where we're standing. She was found lying right about here, right on the path. Her head was to this side, her legs were to this side, both arms by her sides. This is, give or take, 5 or 6 feet. This is exactly where the body was found.
Wow. This is crazy. Do you ever think it's weird how, like, doing these tours, stuff just moves on and people would never know?
Yeah, people just sail by and have no idea.
People
But I
walk
think-
these sidewalks every day and don't even realize.
And have no idea what happened here. If you'd been here at a certain point in 1888 when the police turned up, it was a major deal. Imagine there were people hanging out of the windows in these buildings to see what was going on. The police were banging on all the doors here to get people out of bed. Did you see anything? They went into the train station to question all the people. Had anybody been in here? Did you see anything suspicious? Was anybody running? But I mean, it was a long time ago now, but this is exactly where it was. A body was quickly removed from the scene here and taken to the mortuary, which was just behind Old Montague Street, which is only a short distance from here. When she was actually lifted up off the ground, it became more, the way that the path sloped, they said that the blood from a neck injury, it kind of flowed under her back. So unlike at the other crime scenes, there wasn't a big pool of blood here when they picked her up. But when they picked her up off the ground here, PC John Thane, who was one of the first police at the scene, he said as he picked up the body from the ground, he was suddenly surprised to find that his hands and his forearms were caked in blood that had run from her neck and it soaked into her clothes at the back. There was somebody came out of New Cottage here with a bucket and actually washed away the blood off the floor here. But yeah, it was a long time ago now, but it was.
So you take that?
No, I mean back in those days, I think nowadays we get the old forensics tent out and go through everything with a fine tooth comb. Back in those days, they kind of went, oh no, look at that, a horrible dead body in public. They would make maybe a crime scene sketch, make notes of anything that was particularly obvious of interest. Then, quick, get the body out of the way before anybody sees it and freaks out. The body would head off to the mortuary, somebody would wash the floor down, and then by the time you came walking by here an hour later, it was like nothing ever happened. It was very much different to the way they would handle a crime scene today.
Should we walk?
We can take a nice stroll up the road here. We'll head up to, do you want to do them sort of in order, and we'll do that?
Sure.
Yeah. I think if we do that, we're totally going to be longer than an hour, if that's how long you...
That's perfect.
Yeah, that's fine.
There are a number of horrible spots around Whitechapel that everybody's forgotten and have been forgotten to history. This last building on the left here, the tall one with the light outside, at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders, was lived in by a Mrs. Sado and her husband and their young daughter. They lived on the top floor flat there. Mrs. Sado, it was said, people that knew her were worried she was and depressed at one point and apparently had to take a razor blade off her because they were worried about what she might do with it. Then, shortly after the murder of Annie Chapman, the husband had gone to work. Mrs. Sado apparently told the young daughter that she was going to head out to run an errand and she'd be back soon. She walked out of the room on the top floor and herself over the stairs at the top of that building. Then, a couple of months after that, the husband couldn't handle what had happened. He fell into a horrible depression and did exactly the same thing. Himself in the top floor up on that building there. There'll be somebody in there now. They've got absolutely no idea. This building on the right here, this Majin place, it used to be a sushi restaurant, but it's closed down again. But this building here, it was a cafe back in 1903, so we're 15 years after Jack the Ripper now. But it was a cafe and there was an illegal gambling den down in the basement. There was a guy called Maya Abramovich had learned about that, broke in the middle of the night, thinking he would steal all the loot from the gambling bit downstairs. Broke in, woke up the husband and wife who lived upstairs here. It's the same building. They came down, confronted him in the kitchen. He stabbed them both to death, set the building on fire, took off running. He was later found somewhere. I'm not quite sure how they found him. They found him, convicted him down at Newgate, and then hanged him for that crime. It was a double murder that took place in the kitchen here back in 1903. I bet whoever owns that building now has absolutely no idea, and that's totally been forgotten to history as well.
And she took her own life because part of it was that she was afraid of Jack the Ripper?
Yes, they said there was a quote in the newspaper or something like The recent murders in the area had greatly agitated her, or something like that, it said in the paper. So I think when you read what you can find of the old accounts, it seemed like she was kind of depressed and people were worried about her anyway, but apparently they thought that she'd been getting better, they said. Then, yeah, when everything seemed to be fine, she'd been greatly agitated by the murders in the area. The murder of Annie Chapman had only taken place a couple of weeks earlier, just on the next block here. Yes, and greatly agitated by that, she'd walked out of the room in the top floor there, herself over the railing at the top of the stairs. And yes, it was only a couple of months after that that the husband did exactly the same thing. But it's the same building, it's been there since Victorian times. Nobody's mentioned that in 130 odd years, but yeah, it's the same building, same place. Whoever lives up there, they'll have no idea.
Gosh. Yeah, we were just walking down the street and he started telling us that story. We're like, wait, hold on. Let's start rolling because that's crazy, man.
Anything horrible that's happened in this area, I've probably heard about at some point. There's all sorts of things. When a lot of these buildings are so old, there are buildings right here that are 300 years old, and there's all sorts of things that have happened in this area that don't necessarily have anything to do with Jack the Ripper, but they're the same buildings. There's people in there. There's a lot of history in this area, and not all of it is very nice.
I have a question. During the bombings, how many people in this area died?
A lot. I'd have to look up. It's like people often think like the whole area was sort of razed to the ground, and it wasn't really like that. Depending on which area you lived in, you might be the only house on the street that got hit if you were unfortunate enough. They were mainly aiming for the docks, which are a couple of miles that way. So the nearer you live to the docks, the more of a beating you were probably going to take. But as you walk around this area, you'll see a bunch of spots where there'll be a row of Victorian houses, then a random 1950s one, then a row of Victorian houses. You can see where the bomb landed in the middle. So, yeah, particularly the east end of London, particularly as you get down to the riverside, was one of the main spots in the country that was particularly heavily bombed. They called it the Blitz. It was the aerial bombing raids in the Second World War. If you were standing here in 1943, for a period of time, that was a nightly occurrence. The air raid siren would go, you'd be hiding under the stairs, you'd be in the basement, into the tube. Some places are like an Anderson shelter in the backyard. And yeah, that wasn't even that long ago. There'll be some people walking around the East End here at 90-something years old that totally remember that. And yeah, this is absolutely where it happened.
A dark area, man.
Seriously.
We'll have like a couple of guys where like each of the beats where we tend to win, so this building behind me, this is exactly where number 29 Hanbury Street used to stand back in 1888. This whole side of the street here actually got levelled in 1970. Now it's part of the Truman Brewery Market and the Truman Brewery car park. But this is exactly where number 29 used to stand. All of the buildings on this side are all 300 years old. But yes, that side there was levelled in 1970. But the events had happened here at number 29 Hanbury Street on Saturday, the 8th of September, 1888, would actually begin at 5:45 that morning, 5:45. The Brick Lane Brewer's clock down at the bottom on the left-hand corner hit the quarter hour, and on the top floor of number 29, in the front room, with his wife and 3 fully grown sons packed in there with him, 56-year-old John Davis gets out of bed. Now, he makes him and his wife a cup of tea on the top floor for about 10 minutes, apparently, then decides he's going to use the only toilet on the property. There was an outhouse in the back right corner of the yard before he heads off to work. He goes down the stairs of number 29, noticing on the way that the front door here, always closed and latched, was now standing wide open and was against the wall. He goes through the back door, he opens it outwards and to the left, and looking out into the yard, discovers the horribly mutilated body of Annie Chapman lying at the bottom of a few steps and to the left, in between the steps and the fence. Now, this was 8 days after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, and it was a more disgusting scene that had actually taken place on Bucks Row. She was found lying in the yard here, on her back, with her right hand across her chest. Her intestines had been pulled from inside her. The witnesses who actually got to the yard and saw her lying there at the inquest later said it looked as if her insides had been pulled from her and thrown at her. She had blood all across her face. The intestines were lying across the right side. The objects from inside her pockets had been arranged with business-like precision, the police report said. At her feet, whoever committed the murder, though, had actually removed small parts of her abdomen, and if he didn't eat them at the crime scene, which some offenders have been seen to do today, he took them with him from the crime scene. He'll have run back through the building, through the front door, and taken off into Hanbury Street here. At the time the murder took place, there were 17 people living in number 29 Hanbury Street in 8 separate rooms, and nobody saw or heard a thing. The killer had got away with it yet again.
How come no one ever like saw or heard anything.
Sheer luck on the part of the killer. A lot of the autopsy reports often showed what would be seen today as strangling injuries, and there were other women who got attacked but got away. You know, Ted Bundy has a few survivors, so does Jack the Ripper if you go digging enough, and they always gave the same sort of description. What had happened was they'd met a guy somewhere in the Whitechapel, Spitalfields area here. He'd offered them money to go with them. They'd headed off down some dark, secluded alleyway until he got to that secluded spot, and he'd seemed like Mr. Nice until he got to that spot. Then he'd flipped, slugged you in the face, tripped you up, and tried to strangle you. The victims often had what would be seen today as strangling injuries, either injuries to the back of the head, like he's strangling you and he's hit your head against the ground, bruising to the jawline. If somebody tried to strangle you, the first thing you do is you put your chin down to protect your neck and get injured along your jawline. These injuries were all present at the crime scenes, at the autopsy reports. So it would appear that what he does is he attacks you as quickly as he can, throws you onto the back and strangles you. Then, if you're either unconscious or you're insensible or defenseless, it's at that point the knife comes out. People have this idea that he walked up to you with a knife in his hand, and why did nobody scream? It would appear, in my opinion, the Jack the Ripper victims were completely unaware that he was carrying a knife. He seems to strangle you first, and if he's managed to get you on the ground, strangling like that, if he's lucky enough, nobody's going to hear a thing, and then once somebody's throat is cut, they're not going to be hearing anything after that. I always think luck is his greatest asset. It's like even today, you couldn't have done that kind of thing and get away with it. Anybody near enough to the crime scene would have heard some sort of struggle or feet kicking the ground or choking sounds or that kind of thing, but he's able to get you on the ground and strangle you. Yeah, from there on, if he's lucky enough, nobody's going to hear a thing.
Yeah, I kind of forgot how like crazy graphic this story is.
It's like it's much worse than people tend to think it is. People often think, like, could you see the movies and he's got his top hat and his doctor's bag and this kind of thing. Sorry, you're parking. Sorry, bud. Sorry, yeah, sorry. When you see the movies, he's got the top hat and the doctor's bag, and out comes the scalpel, and they make out like he's some medical man. And it was nothing like that at all. The case was considerably worse. There's kind of two Jack the Rippers now. There's the actual Jack the Ripper from back in the day, and then there's the Hollywood guy with his top hat and his cape and his doctor's bag and his royal family connections and these ludicrous reasons why he's supposedly committing the murders. But yeah, the Jack the Ripper case is considerably nastier and more violent than people often seem to realize it is. Even with all of the modern day serial killers we know about, of all the serial killers, there's only a small percentage of these people who are really as nasty and violent and graphic as Jack the Ripper was. And it's also particularly unusual that he's doing this in the street. So Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, would do these kind of things to you, but he would do it in the house when the door's locked and nobody's there. The idea you would do this in the street, just hope to God nobody comes along and run away and manage to get away with it time and time again. It's not completely unheard of, but even today that's extremely unusual.
Yeah, I'd say so. I don't think people are doing that today, really.
They wouldn't be able to.
Well,
Should we head on?
next spot.
Next spot? Right, I tell you what the next spot would be. The motive of this disorder. On the other side of the road here is the famous 10 Bells pub. Whenever you watch a Jack the Ripper movie, they're always chugging beers and the 10 Bells, and that's the real one. When you do see it in a movie, it's always this giant warehouse of a pub with hundreds of people in there. It's only quite a small pub when you actually see the real one. But it's been here since 1740. When they originally opened it, it was called the 8 Bells Ale House, because Christ Church of Spitalfields, standing next door here, was completed in 1729. And when it was completed, the church had 8 bells in it. So it was called the 8 Bells Ale House. In the time since then, they upgraded the church to have 10 bells. So they renamed the pub the 10 Bells. In the time since then, they went to 12 bells. Now they're back at 8 again. But that was enough pub changing. It's been the 10 Bells ever since. Whenever you watch the Jack the Ripper movies, they always make out like all of the victims knew each other, or they're all drinking in there together, or the killer would regularly frequent the place. I'm sure he probably did, and I'm sure that the victims totally all did drink in there at one point, although there's no evidence whatsoever that they actually knew each other. In my research, at least, the only actual thing I could find that ties the 10 Bells to the Jack the Ripper case is that Annie Chapman might have been last seen alive in there. On the morning of a murder, They used to open the pub at the weekends at 5 o'clock in the morning for the market traders who used to set up here in Spitalfields Market. If you were setting up your market stall at 5 in the morning and you really fancied the beer, the pub was open. At 5:15 that morning, if you remember, she was found at about 6 o'clock, just behind here on Hanbury Street. At 5:15, there was a guy called Ed Waldron, who was the landlord in there at the time. He said he was working on the bar. He said a woman fitting her description went in through the door, stood at the bar there having a drink, and he said that a man poked his head in the door here. Whoever he was, it was a white guy with a mustache. He said he wore a flat cap, he had a jacket and no waistcoat. He put his head in the door. If that was Annie Chapman, he said he called her outside and to the left. They headed off that way, and then Annie Chapman was then found dead in the rear yard of number 29 Hanbury Street, just behind the pub, about 45 minutes later. Ed Waldron was actually taken by the police to the mortuary, and he said that looking at Annie on the mortuary slab, he said judging by the clothes she was wearing, he thinks that was probably her, which isn't really brilliant. But that is the only thing that I could find that actually definitively ties the 10 bells to the Jack the Ripper case. But when you watch the movies, that's always the pub that they feature prominently.
But if that's true, then Jack the Ripper would have been seen here, if that's true?
If that was indeed him that poked his head in the door, then yes. But I mean, the police said as well, whoever the killer was, it was a local man living in this immediate area. They think he was seen drinking in the local pubs, of which the 10 Bells was a prominent one, but so is the White Hart, the Princess Alice, the Bell, the Pride of Spitalfields. All of these pubs, he's surely been in there as well. But the police believed he would sit drinking in the local pubs. Then, when he gets kicked out at about 12:30, 1 in the morning, which was closing time, and he's got a buzz going, instead of just going home, he goes for a nice walk around the streets in the dark at night time. If he doesn't see an opportunity, he's bright enough to not fancy his trip at the Hangman. He won't push it, he'll go home, he'll think nothing of it. But if he's walking down one of these dark streets here, and he sees some lone woman on the street corner, and he's in the mood, and he's got the knife on him, and he thinks he can do it and get away with it, he would do the deed, run like hell. He only lives 2 minutes away, somewhere in this immediate area, so by the time you find the body in 5 minutes' time, he's back in the living room. The idea that he was drinking before the murders as well. Also, the evidence at the crime scene seems to suggest that as well. The fact that there's somebody wishes to commit murders doesn't necessarily amaze me, but the fact that he's doing these murders in the street in the way that he is, he seems to be indifferent to the danger he's putting himself in. He doesn't seem to make any effort to make sure he doesn't get caught and he gets away with it. He just explodes in the street, and this indifference he has to the danger he's putting himself in as he does that, in a modern case would suggest that he's either mentally ill, which you think would be a given, but Ted Bundy is legally sane and sensible, he's just not very nice, or he's drunk, or he's high as a kite, because he's indifferent to the danger he's putting himself in. That doesn't seem to bother him. So everybody else in the area, in the slums, in Whitechapel, usually at the weekends, in the middle of the night, was drunk and on drugs. I don't see why this guy would be any different. But yes, the police believe that's what he would do. He would sit drinking in the pubs. Then, when he's got a buzz going, if he sees an opportunity, does the deed, and that's how he does it. But yeah, this would have been, no doubt, one of the pubs he would have been in, along with plenty of other ones. But whenever you see a documentary or a movie or whatever, the 10 Bells is always the one that they feature. Well, really, I reckon these security guys might come out and say you can't film. Of all the Jack the Ripper spots, this one here is the first, if you like, that now looks nothing at all like it used to in Victorian times. Back in Victorian times, in 1888, this is where Dorset Street used to stand. The street actually ran right through the middle of this new building here, connecting Crispin Street at that end to Commercial Street at this end. On this side, if I'd been here at the time, this was a row of horrible slum buildings on this side. I'd be looking at a row of front doors here. Over on this side, it was another horrible row of slum buildings, mainly low-priced lodgings, brothels, and things like that. And yeah, the street ran right through the middle. About 2/3 of the way up from the western end here, on the left-hand side, you had at number 27 what was called a chandler's shop. You know, there's like a grocery shop, a convenience store today. It was owned by John McCarthy, who was a landlord of all the rooms in Miller's Court. I've actually seen the blueprint of this building, like over the old Victorian map. Number 27, the chandler's shop, actually stood exactly where that office is there, with those poster things in the window. Immediately behind the chandler's shop on the left-hand side, there was a 3-foot wide passageway that took you into a place called Miller's Court. If you went strolling down the passageway, second door on the right was number 13 Miller's Court, and it's there that Mary Kelly was staying on the night she died. Now, on Friday, the 9th of November, 1888, at about 10:30 in the morning, a guy called Thomas Bowyer turned up here. He was the assistant to John McCarthy, the landlord, and he was heading down to Mary Kelly's room to collect the rent money. He went down, banged on the door, no answer. Tried the door, it was locked. He went round the side to the broken window pane, put his hand through the window, pulled back the makeshift curtain on the inside, and looking into the room, discovered the appallingly mutilated body of Mary Kelly lying on the bed inside. Now, this was such a big deal that they did call for the camera guy. There's a particularly graphic photograph that would easily come up on a Google search of Mary Kelly lying on the bed all mutilated. It's a very early example of crime scene photography, but it really shows the horror of what was actually going on in that room. When the police got in there, they found her lying on the bed, legs wide apart, one hand across her chest, intestines across her shoulder, objects in the form of body organs this time actually arranged around her on the bed. The majority of her face had been removed, her liver was lying in between her feet. Both of her breasts had been removed with roughly circular incisions, according to Dr. Phillips, who was the police divisional surgeon for H Division, Whitechapel at the time. The police said at the time that organs and strips of flesh, they said, were actually hanging from nails in the wall and had been draped across the back of the chairs. I've also read other stories where police actually turning up into the room had actually slipped on the blood when they went in there. The blood had actually sprayed the wall. It soaked through the pillow and the mattress and created a pool around 2 to 3 feet wide underneath. It was far and away the most disturbing of the Jack the Ripper scenes. When the police turned up here as well, they found the door. It's often referred to that the door was locked. They actually said it was jammed in the original police reports. The police said that the lock on Mary Kelly's door had some sort of spring thing inside it. Whoever had pushed the door closed last, which seems to have been the killer, would appear to have broken the lock somehow. The door was jammed. They had to break it open with a pickaxe. In the original police report, it says something to the effect of, imagine how this man must have felt after spending some 2 hours at the crime scene with strips of flesh hanging on the walls, only to try the door and realize he'd sealed himself in there with his murder victim. The police believed that what he actually did in this instance was slid up one of the big windows, stepped out into Miller's Court, turned around, slid the window back down, and took off again. A woman called Caroline Maxwell, who actually lived in Miller's Court, later told the police that at some time at about 6:30 in the morning, she'd heard somebody walking quickly down the passageway out back into Dorset Street, but didn't hear a door bang behind him. Possibly that might have actually been the killer fleeing from the crime scene, because usually after this murder, people claim that the murders stopped, but they didn't. There were 2 more afterwards. The murder of Alice Mackenzie on the 17th of July, 1889, and then the murder of Francis Coles on the 13th of February, 1891. After that, he really does seem to disappear, but the murder of Mary Kelly here in Miller's Court on Dorset Street was far and away the most violent out of all of them.
So what do you think is the deal with all the posing, the ritualistic stuff, and like random chunks of flesh nailed to the wall?
They would say today, you didn't just wake up this morning and think, that's it, I'm going murdering, I'm going to be the serial killer. They would say that a series of murders like this actually begins long before the first murder takes place in the killer's mind. Something that he's seen, heard, or read about excites him, and he's influenced by something. He'll sit thinking about this obsessively, fantasizing about it, playing it over in his head, and then when he's actually at his crime scene, he's acting out this complicated fantasy that he's arrived at in his head. So you'd have to go back in time and grab him to see what the specific relevance of this hand across the chest and the head to the side and the legs apart is. But if the murders had continued, you could expect to see him do this again. This is his fantasy. Committing the murder isn't good enough. He has to act out these certain mutilations. Everything's always posed in the same way each time. He's acting out the fantasy. If this was happening today and you went and arrested the guy, there's a video or a picture in his hard drive that looks real like that crime scene. Something he's seen is influenced to do that, and this is what he's attempting to act out. It's like there was a guy at the time suggested, there was one of the medical guys that suggested that he was acting under religious mania, he said, which may or may not have been the case. But it said there's a church down the road on Prescott Street, only like about a 5-minute walk that way, where there's a big statue of Joseph and the Virgin Mary and they're actually standing there in the statue with one hand across the chest like that, and like some sort of like staff thing that goes up across the shoulder. And I mean, when I wrote the book, I didn't put that in there because it felt like a reach. You were kind of stretching. But I thought, if that was his local church, for example, that statue doesn't half look like the victims, with the hand across the chest and the thing across the shoulder, and even like wearing the robes. It kind of looks like the dresses they're wearing. It's a bit of a reach to say that, but maybe if there was some sort of religious significance, that statue, perhaps, which is Victorian, could have influenced them. You'd have to go back in time and grab them and see where it is. But it's, yes, they would call that the killer's signature in a modern case, this posing of the body. If he'd murdered you and then had to run away because he thought someone was coming and he didn't get to do that, you might feel disappointed when he gets home. The whole point of murdering you is he gets to act out his mutilations, if he's able to do that. And then this posing of the body is extremely important to him, and that's why you see this repeated at each crime scene. It's so important to him to do that. He's putting himself at greater danger. He spends more time at the crime scene. He might leave evidence, somebody might see him, but rather than do the murder and run, he feels compelled to stay here at the crime scene to act this out. That's the part that's most important to him. If there'd been 20 more murders, you could expect to see this again and again. This is what he likes, to get his gratification from the offense, to get the most out of his offense. This is what he feels he needs to do, and something has inspired him to do that. But without going back in time and grabbing him, we can only guess at what that something might have been.
What's the questions we gotta ask tonight?
Honestly.
Well, you wanna... What's like a British thing to say, like, walk on?
We could walk on. Three weeks after the murder of Annie Chapman, on the 30th of September 1888, we then had the double murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. Sometimes it's referred to as the double event. Two murders in one night. The first murder actually took place up on Dutfield's yard, which is now, it was on Burner Street off Commercial Road, which is now called Hanbury Street. 1 o'clock in the morning, a guy called Louis Deemschutz was arriving back on Burner Street with his pony and cart. He lived on the top floor of number 40 with his wife. Number 40 was the International Working Men's Educational Society. It was a predominantly Jewish working men's drinking social club, kind of like a private members pub. At number 40, down the side of the building, lay Dutfield's yard. It was this long, dark yard with a couple of horrible cottages on the left-hand side. 1 o'clock in the morning, Deemschutz arrived with his pony and cart. He made his way down Burner Street. He turned right to go through the only entrance or exit to Dutfield's yard that had no light source of its own. The yard itself was entirely pitch black. He attempted to take the pony into the yard, but found that it stopped, shied to the left, backed up, and refused to go anywhere near the right-hand wall. He gets off from where he is. He lights a match to see what the holdup is and noticed that there was a woman lying on the floor. He wasn't necessarily worried at that point, though. He was suspicious that something bad might have happened, having heard of the murders in the area, but was also thinking when it was that dark she could have been drunk or unconscious for some reason in the yard. He went into the building, came back out of the building with two men, a guy named Morris Eagle and a guy called Isaac Kozabrodsky, who had a lamp with him. With the lamp, Kozabrodsky noticed that she'd been murdered and there was blood running down the yard into a drain. Then they ran out into the street, ran for police. The first policeman on the scene there was a PC Henry Lamb, who had actually been on his beat on Commercial Street, just at the end of the road. He got into the yard. The call was put out for a doctor. A Dr. Blackwell was the first one on the scene. He got there at 1:15 in the morning, said that the murder had taken place, in his opinion, 20 to 30 minutes before he got there, at some point between 1:45 and 1:55, around 5, 10, possibly 15 minutes before Deemschutz actually arrived and made the discovery. Whoever the killer was, PC Henry Lamb, along with other police who had turned up by that time, determined that the killer was not in the club, he was not at the scene. Whoever he was, he'd done the deed and he'd gotten away with it again. But then, around 45 minutes later, a second discovery was made here in Mitre Square, where we are standing right now. And it was the murder of 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes. The story of what happened here in Mitre Square, the murder of Catherine Eddowes, the mystery of Mitre Square, the story begins at 1:30 that morning, 30 minutes after the murder of Elizabeth Stride. The police were pouring into Berners Street at the time, but unaware of any of that, with no police radios or any form of modern communication, a PC Edward Watkins comes walking by at the City of London Police. He came walking along Leadenhall Street at the back, turned left, came walking along Mitre Street, you can see the sign on the wall over there, came walking along, turned right, up across the cobbles and into Mitre Square. The square now, the shape of the square is basically exactly the same, but the buildings are different. There used to be two buildings standing right here to my right. The building here, sort of in this corner, if you see what I mean, 3 stories high. It was somebody's house. There was another one next door to it here, 3 stories high. It was Taylor's picture frame makers. You then had a single lane came up into the square here. Number 3, Mitre Square, the only inhabited house in the square, stood right over here to my left. It was lived in by an Inspector Richard Pierce of the City of London Police at the time, who would take a lot of abuse in the weeks that followed because the murder went on in full view of his bedroom window, and of course he failed to see or hear anything. 1:30 in the morning, PC Watkins came up into the square. He did a lap of the square. Everything was fine, nothing to see. Then something interesting happens. On the other side of these buildings ahead of me here was another Jewish working men's club. It was called the Imperial Club. It stood at number 16 to 17 Duke Street. There were 3 men drinking in there. 41-year-old cigarette salesman Joseph Lewend, also their friend Harry Harris, and a man named Joseph Hyams Levy. Joseph Lewend, who's often pronounced as Joseph Lavender, depending on where you hear people talking about him, he had a pocket watch with him. He made more money than most people in the area. He realised it was 1:34 as he left the Imperial Club, heading home to Aldgate and passing the end of Church Passage over here for 1:35, where the 3 men would all see a man standing on the end of this passageway, talking to Catherine Eddowes, who had a hand on the man's chest, but not as if she meant to push him away. Whoever that was, despite walking within 9 to 10 feet of the pair, the 3 men would all state that they were talking so quietly they were unable to hear a word that was being said. And whoever that was, he has to be the killer. She didn't have time to run into anybody else. PC Watkins said the streets were absolutely deserted that night and she'd be found dead and horribly mutilated only 10 minutes later, right here in the corner. Whoever that was, Joseph Lewend said he stared him full in the face, got a really good look at him and paid particular attention, because he previously made his opinion noted that Mitre Square here was dangerous with a serial killer on the loose. It was too dark, too deserted, and should be watched. Whoever that was, the 3 men made their way home and didn't turn to look back and see where he went, but they would later describe him as being in his late 20s. He was 5'9" tall, he was white, he wore a small grey flat cap with a peak. Jack the Ripper did not have a top hat like you often see in the movies. It was a small grey flat cap with a peak. He wore a loose-fitting pepper and salt jacket. He had a red neckerchief around his neck, a fair complexion, a small fair moustache. He was of Eastern European or Jewish appearance, it was said. But whoever that was, they made their way home. That was 1:35. At 1:40, another policeman comes strolling by. 33-year-old PC James Harvey of the City of London Police. He came walking along Duke Street, past the Imperial Club. He was heading up the road to Aldgate, but his beat brought him to the end of Church Passage, but not into the square. That's PC Watkins' problem. At 1:40, he came walking down the passageway. Whoever Joseph Lewend and his mates had just seen was now gone. He got to the end, shone his lamp around. Nothing to see, nothing out of the ordinary, definitely not a murder taking place. Off he went, back around his beat. Then at 1:44, PC Watkins returned, again along Mitre Street. He said he stopped momentarily on that corner there, looked up and down the street, there was nobody there. He came up into the square, got as far as this corner at the back of the house, and this time finds the appallingly mutilated body of Catherine Eddowes lying right here in the corner, exactly where I'm standing. When they dug up the square, and all the old Victorian cobbles were taken up, I only live 2 minutes away, I came down and had a look, and you could actually see the foundations of these 2 Victorian buildings right here. is where the back of the house was. If you dug up the ground here, you'd see the bricks at the back of the Victorian house, and she was found directly behind the house in the corner. Her head was in the corner, it was said, towards where the gates are now. Her feet were pointing towards the square, back towards you. Her hands were both lying by her sides, as had been the case with Martha Tabram and Mary Ann Nichols. Her head had been turned to the left. She was facing this way to the back of the house. Where I'm standing here is exactly where the body was lying. Now, at this particular crime scene, the violence and mutilation was worse than at the crime scenes before it. In a modern case, we would call it an escalating level of violence. It might imply that the killer feels the need to act out greater cruelties and violence in order to get the most from his offence. But lying at the crime scene here, she was lying on her back with her legs wide apart. Her clothes had been pulled chest high. Her intestines, according to the doctor's report, had actually been pulled from inside her and stuffed into a throat wound. A 2.5-foot section of her colon was cut from inside her and was lying on the ground here, in between the left arm and the body. Her face had been cut repeatedly with a number of stab and slash injuries. The bottom part of her right ear was missing. The end of her nose was missing. Both sets of her eyelids had been cut through. The killer had removed her left kidney and a womb and then cut off almost half of an apron she was wearing. It would appear that he'd done that to wrap up these body parts in. It would later be found wet with blood, it was described as. The killer has then fled from the scene, and only moments later did PC Watkins come up into the scene and make the discovery. Even by the killer's standards, he was outrageously fortunate to be able to miss the police in this area, who it seems he couldn't possibly have known about. It seemed incredible that he could have done it again, especially right in front of a policeman's house. But yet again, the killer had now committed 2 murders in one night and had absolutely gotten away with it.
That's crazy. And now this is just like a driveway to a school?
It was a school at the time as well. So where you've got it's slightly different now. Where the playground is with the school, it used to be it was a chemical warehouse for a company called Horner and Sons that actually used to stand here. The buildings at the back here were actually rebuilt in 1908. But if you'd been here at the time, that was a residential block of houses across the back. That was the school over on this side. The playground was actually on the roof behind the fence up there. It's probably a bit dark to see it, but the playground was on the roof. I believe that the chemical warehouse stood here until the Second World War. There was a bomb landed here in Mitre Square during the war. But yes, it was a school at the time, but yes, it was rebuilt in 1908.
You can almost see like Jack the Ripper standing there, you know, down this little alleyway with the shadow and talking to, is it Catherine?
Catherine Eddowes, yes. When you watch the movies, and he's always walking down those creepy, narrow passageways, there's not too many of them left, but this was actually one of them, led down into the square. This obviously modern building at the back here used to be a tea warehouse at the time for a company called Keeley and Tongue. Imagine if the tea warehouse went all the way up to what is now the flower bed there. This wall on the right is not the same Victorian one. It got bombed in the war, but it's in exactly the same spot. But the far end of the flower bed, if you imagine that, that was essentially where the passageway came down. The tea warehouse went all the way up to there. That was a 3-foot wide passageway. So you were seen standing at the far right there. The 3 guys had made their way home, then walking down the passageway in the pitch black. They would have been in single file, one behind the other. There was only 3 feet of space. They walked down the passageway, got to this spot right here, where he's done the deed, and in my opinion, he's ran that way and off into the dark streets behind, rather than back out onto the high street where the police were. And he's made a complicated route round through onto Goulston Street, where he's dumped the missing part of an apron and then taken off. But yes, this is another spot where you wouldn't look at this and think it's one of the most notorious spots in criminal history, but something particularly outrageous happened exactly where we're standing right now.
I mean, I think we're pretty good on our tour at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I only live 2 minutes away, so we can cut it if you want, or we can, right, I would have thought, I mean, if you want, we could wrap it up now, or I wouldn't bother going to Burner Street or stuff like that. The only other place that we're hit on the tour, there's a doorway about a couple of streets that way, which is the doorway where the missing part of her apron was found when he ripped it from her in the square here. So that's like the only spot, if you like, where there was a clue left. That's the Victorian building as well. It's the same one. We'll get there.
I feel like we should. Maybe we could start our ghost hunt there.
Following on from the murder of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, where the killer tore off nearly half of her apron and took her with him, we're now standing on Goulston Street, and the events of what happened here on Goulston Street actually begin at 2:20 that morning. 1 o'clock, we find Elizabeth Stride. 1:44, we found Catherine Eddowes. This time, though, 2 in the morning, a policeman comes strolling by, a PC Alfred Long of the Metropolitan Police. He comes strolling by on this side of the road. He turns in left from Wentworth Street on the corner there, comes walking by here, 2, passes this doorway. Everything's fine. He goes to the end of the street, turns left, goes back around his beat, reappearing here 35 minutes later. An hour and 10 minutes after we found Catherine Eddowes, around 2 hours, and somebody was killing Elizabeth Stride. He said by this point he'd heard of the murder in Mitre Square and had heard rumours of another one. 2:05, he comes strolling past here again, passes this doorway again, and this time finds the missing part of Catherine's apron, covered in blood, lying a few yards in on the right-hand side, right here in the entrance of what is now the Happy Days fish shop. But on the doorway on the right-hand side, as you went in here, it's the same building as well. The building was built in 1886. On the doorway on the right-hand side, as you went in, on the black bricks in white chalk with some graffiti, it said, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," with seemingly a strange misspelling of the word Jews. PC Long, when he wrote it down in his handbook, said that it was spelled Juwes. But there were other police quickly arrived on the scene. There was a Detective Constable Daniel Hulse arrived from Mitre Square. When he got to the scene, it said Jews. Another policeman said it just said Jews, and there was nothing wrong with it. This then caused problems at the inquest, and the coroner said, "Why didn't you just leave it on the wall there until we could get the camera guy down to take a picture? We could have examined the handwriting and stuff like that." But at the scene at the time, Commissioner Charles Warren of the Metropolitan Police, who was a very top man in the police, made a rare appearance here in Whitechapel. He rolled up here in a horse and cart, got out, viewed it on the wall. It was 5:30 in the morning by that point, and he said that the vast majority of people that lived in here were Jewish residents here in Whitechapel that worked on the morning markets. And because people were already setting up the markets with such vicious anti-Semitism in the area at the time, he feared that if the graffiti was left here on the wall, Jewish people would be targeted, and he said the building would be wrecked. So he demanded it was washed off the wall and into history, which it was, with a sponge at 5:30 that morning. Whenever you watch the movies or a documentary series, though, they often make out it was this giant flamboyant graffiti on the wall. The original police report said it was 3 lines of a good schoolboy's round hand. That's how it was described. They said the capital letters were 3/4 of an inch high, and the rest of the letters were in proportion. It was literally like somebody had just handwritten it on the wall like that. The whole thing was probably about this big. But this, if I lifted up this shutter on the right-hand side, the bricks here, is exactly where it was. The killer may or may not have written the graffiti on the wall, but the missing part of Catherine Eddowes' apron dumped here was the only real clue that he ever left in the entire case.
So, what's your theory? I know you have to have a theory.
And who I think the killer is.
Of course.
My guy is a guy called Albert Backett. Nobody's ever suggested him before. Bachert. His parents were German. He was born and raised in Whitechapel. He's the right age. He fits the right description. He's got a criminal record for all the things you'd expect a serial killer to have today. He was constantly injecting himself into the investigation. He told the police that he'd met the killer and spoken to him on 2 separate occasions. He told the police that the killer was writing letters to his house to threaten him and warn him of murders. He said that the killer was writing graffiti on the wall of his house, threatening him again, but it was magically washed away before the police could see it. He turned up completely uninvited to the inquest of Francis Coles in February 1891, whose murder was attributed to the same killer. He turned up to the inquest at the Working Lads Institute on Whitechapel Road, demanding to be allowed to be on the jury, just as the jury were about to be taken to view a body in the mortuary. Threw such a big fit when they wouldn't let him that the coroner told him if he didn't sit down and behave himself, he was going to have the police remove him from the building. I think he just wanted to see the body in the mortuary. I'm convinced he's a seedy pervert, but he worked as well as an engraver. They used to engrave copper plates for printing banknotes off, or if you want your name on the back of your watch, easy guy. But the reason that's interesting is because I found 4 women in the area who all got attacked but got away. You know, Ted Bundy has a few survivors. So does Jack the Ripper, if you go digging enough. And they all gave the same sort of story. They were sleeping rough in a doorway in Whitechapel, Spitalfields, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, usually drunk, vulnerable, by themselves, where they met this guy. And he said, "You got no money for a bed, have you not? Check this out." And he would pull out what appeared to be these half-crown or half-sovereign coins that were real valuable. 2 of those would have paid you rent in some slum room for a month. Nobody was walking around with these. He would offer them the money to go with him. And then when they got to that secluded spot, he'd attacked, slugged them in the face, tripped them up, tried to strangle them. On one occasion, actually pulled a blade and cut a woman's arm open. But they'd struggled and screamed and scared him away. Then when he'd gone, you realised that these coins he'd given you were bogus. They were polished super brightly, it was said. Valueless coins polished super brightly to appear like gold coins, and then crimped and machined around the edges, it was said, to appear like half-crowns or half-sovereigns when they weren't. As a copper plate engraver with years of experience, Albert Backett would absolutely have had the tools and the knowledge to do that in the house. I mean, who else would? Not many people would have had that. Those tools and knowledge to do that in the house. Then, in 1889, they actually took him to court and charged him on 2 separate counts for passing counterfeit coins exactly like that in a bunch of pubs throughout East London. In my opinion, it's absolutely him. I think if this was happening today, Albert Backett, even though he's never been suggested before, is absolutely far and away the #1 person that the investigators would want to go and speak to.
Yeah.
So after all your years of research, you think you know who Jack the Ripper is?
I'm open-minded if you've got some legendary evidence, but it's going to have to be something good. Usually, when people have a Jack the Ripper suspect, there's some ludicrous reason why they claim it's the killer, and it's something that would never fly today. Oh, he said he hated women once, or he was a Freemason, or the police were Freemasons, so they wouldn't have snitched him up, they'd let him get away with it. It's always something ridiculous. I think Albert Backett is the only one of the Jack the Ripper victims where he's right in the middle of the murder zone. You can't rule him out of any of it. He ticks every box you'd expect a serial killer to have today. Until somebody comes forward with some outrageous evidence, I'm convinced it's him personally. And I think I find it absolutely amazing that nobody's ever suggested him before. I think the police at the time must have considered him a nuisance, but if it was happening today, he's absolutely the guy that you'll go and talk to.
What's his name, Robert?
Albert Backett, sir. Albert, Bachert.
And then, I guess, you've been doing these tours for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody on your tours ever experienced anything on the line of paranormal?
I have heard people say, particularly when we're in Mitre Square, I've occasionally heard people say that they felt a presence or things like that. Not very often, but I have heard that. I had one lady tell me once that she'd seen Joseph Lewend in a vision and claimed that she knew that absolutely was the killer he saw because she appeared. Usually when there's some sort of paranormal thing that people mention, it's usually in Mitre Square. I can't say I've felt it myself, but yes, on rare occasions I have heard that.
Well, anything else you want to say, or is that good? I mean, I know there's a lot you would want to tell us, but...
Oh, I can do this all day. If anybody does want to read about the Jack the Ripper case in detail, never done before, my book is called Jack the Ripper, One Autumn in Whitechapel. If you were to Google it, you can find it on Etsy. You can find it on ripperworld.net, which is my website. If you happen to be in London and you want to come on a Jack the Ripper tour with me, I guide the Jack the Ripper tour with Ripper Vision. I'm usually here Tuesdays to Saturdays.
Well, my friend, here we are again. These cameras. You ready to solve this f***ing crime?
Yeah, thanks to this guy, he already did all the work. Should be easy tonight.
Ready to confirm the solving of the crime?
Let's do it.
All right, man. Woohoo!
All right.
This doesn't happen all week for us, literally.
This whole trip hasn't done.
No. We've been to like the most haunted places in the UK on this trip, and this device has not done that one time. Like, look at to show you what it does, you have to literally come up to it. It's a EMF sensor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fucking weird. All right. All right, guys. So this is crazy. This is the door frame where, if you remember, during our tour, the only clue in the Jack the Ripper case was ever found. And there was that graffiti there that was anti-Semitic, and the bloody apron. Interesting that this was the only time he really slipped up and left something like that. Obviously, I think he purposefully left it. We wanted to come here to investigate and see if any of the spirits that are around here could give us any clues or details. Interestingly enough, this REM pod
He's going crazy.
has been going crazy since we set it up, and just to show that it's working properly with a new battery.
It is.
Yeah, so there's definitely something here. Really quickly, you've showed us that you're here. Thank you. Can you touch that red light if you saw Jack the Ripper? Just go touch that red light if you saw the man who left the bloody handkerchief. Okay, stop. Thank you. You think if we asked you some questions, you could tell us a little bit about what he looked like? If you could do that for us, press that, grab that red light again. If you can. All right. Dude, this is actually crazy, man. All right, thank you. Turn this off for the noise. To whoever's here right now, my name's Colin.
My name's Connor.
Like I stated before and you answered yes to, we are here to speak about the Whitechapel murders, Jack the Ripper. So, right when I start, literally the moment I hit the DR60 record. All right, here we go. Can you tell us what Jack the Ripper looked like because you saw him?
Why did he leave a clue at this building?
The guy we were just talking to thinks it was a man named Albert. Is that true?
How many people did Jack the Ripper kill?
How tall was the man who put the apron in here?
Why did Jack the Ripper kill people?
Was the man that was here dressed in any sort of way? Was he wearing a hat? Was this man who drew this graffiti anti-Semitic?
Why did the man who killed all these people stop?
All right. Want to listen?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what Jack the Ripper looked like because you saw him? Why did he leave a clue at this building? The guy we were just talking to thinks it was a man named Albert. Is that true? How many
Dude, what? Literally, yes.
leave a clue at this building?
It's fucking crazy, actually.
The guy we were just talking to thinks it was a man named Albert. Is that true? How many people did Jack the Ripper kill? How tall was the man who put the apron in here? Why did Jack the Ripper kill people? Was the man that was here dressed in any sort of way? Was he wearing a hat? Is this man who drew this graffiti anti-Semitic? Why did the man who killed all these people stop?
The lead on Albert.
Mm-hmm.
That was about it. Well, you want to do our Estes? Alright, now Connor, before we start this, I want you to ask and get into the mind of a criminal investigator here.
Okay.
Like you're the detective in this case. So I want you to ask questions like, whoever was here, how tall was he? What was he wearing? Did he mention anything? Was he a local? Questions specifically about this incident right here. Dude, what the f***? This thing won't even turn on. This was just f***ing charging all goddamn night, dude. And by the way, guys, I left the goggles in our hotel, so I'm just gonna close my eyes.
Beware.
And I think you guys can trust me enough now. I don't even know how I would look at Connor with my head down like this. I can't even see you. Okay.
Oh my god.
Let's do this.
Voice.
Alright, we're here to ask some questions about Jack the Ripper.
Fine. What'd you say, sir?
We want to know,
He had a tick.
did you see him the night that he dropped off
Brilliant.
the apron here at this building? Oh my god.
They were all gentlemen.
How tall? Actually, did you see that
Sit and
man
listen.
that night?
You can't catch him, I guarantee it.
Did you ever see the guy that's known as Jack the Ripper?
I was outside.
So you did see him. Can you tell me how tall was
He slayed.
Yes.
how tall was this man?
We're gathering.
They all watched.
Can you tell me what this man looked like?
Little.
He was a smaller man.
Small.
Oh.
Dorchester.
Tabram.
Yeah, he said it.
So this man was a smaller man. Was he dressed in a certain way?
Run now.
No, I'm not gonna run. Can you tell me?
Brandon.
No.
Can you tell me?
So normal.
Was this guy dressed just like an average man?
The last one in the morning. Local customer.
He was just a local guy. I can't find my way.
Live next door.
So Jack lived around here. Can you tell me if you knew this guy?
Catch him, please.
Yeah,
He was somebody who wanted it.
he wanted them to catch him? Is that why he left the clue?
Gore. A horrible star and cheat. Had a horse.
He had a horse? And he was a cheat. Is it because he was giving people fake money?
Guilty of having fun.
Guilty of having fun. Are you saying that killing people is fun? And that's why he was doing it?
He sort of did it She didn't deserve.
No, she did not. Did he come around here very often?
You're ready to count.
So many.
So many.
Knew it.
Can you tell me about how old this man looked?
Wasn't until late. He wanted an experience.
Did this man wear a hat?
Strapping young man.
He's a good-looking guy. Did he wear a hat?
Yes, sir. Carried a pound.
A pound, like money?
It's worth nothing.
False.
He carried around false money. So it's this.
Take it and shut up.
So it was the Albert man. Is that true?
You have no idea what you're doing. Turn around and run unless you want to ping me.
Is Albert here?
2 cents to nothing. Shut down the investigation.
This refrigerator's going fucking nuts. I don't know if it's just because it's near my phone. Okay, yeah. Okay. What can
I
you
wish I'd seen.
What can you tell me about this Albert guy?
He had a glove.
He always wore the
Some
glove?
girls didn't get it.
Like, not all girls died by his hand?
Wanted to take them all. They used to get him really hard.
Well, that's kind of freaky.
Ooh, 'twas a thrill.
So,
Yeah, he was doing this for thrills. He got enjoyment from it.
It gave him, I swear, bro, it gave him wood.
So it was very sexual for him.
A local worker.
Yeah, we heard he was
I'd get out of here.
he was an engraver. He worked on
Killed under the moon.
Yeah, he did kill people at night.
Back home burials.
we love talking.
So you knew Albert?
In his yard. Ooh, that was creepy. Back home burials in his yard?
What's that about? Did he bury some people?
I'll tell you what, do me a favor, leave.
Alright, we'll get out of here in a second. Is there anywhere else we should go?
Back home.
Yeah?
I can't tell you anything. I'm very sorry, buddy.
Well, alright, we'll get out of here. We're gonna go over to Mitre Square. Or Mitre Square.
There has been something.
Will we be able to talk to Jack over there?
Mildred.
Jack or
Nice.
Albert?
I'll be seeing you.
Alright, well, we're gonna head over there.
Jesus.
Well, it matched up that it might be Albert.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
It was talking about the fake money.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even connect that.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy, actually.
I was asking, I was like, was it Albert? And it was like, you said he was a cheat. Were you talking about the fake money? And you said something about like
Body.
you said something about like he carried a pound.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I was like, are you talking about the like a pound of what? Are you talking about the money? And you said something else. But I mean, it really does seem like it. You were talking about Albert, and he was a local guy who lived
Yes.
around here.
Yes. And I heard the in the front yard or
Yeah.
like something buried.
Like,
And I was about to say body, and then I was like, did he like have more victims that like he's never been caught, so his yard would never have been looked at?
like even thinking about like, I mean, bombings going on, he could have been just like around doing some other shit. In the meantime, go mess with the body during some bombings. No one's gonna chalk it up to being a serial killer. I mean, I know he was older by that time, but you never know.
That's interesting, actually. It's an interesting theory. And this said pious, like religious, how some theories say.
Spirits walk.
Well, you want to go to our next place? Yeah. All right, guys. So right now we are at the scene where Catherine's body was discovered here in London. Now, this is one of the most infamous Jack the Ripper sites that you can visit. He was physically seen right over there. So any spirits that are in this area, I'm sure are going to be able to give us a good description of who he was, along with the spirit, hopefully, of Catherine, who spoke with him, obviously, before she was murdered. So her body was found right there. And we're tired and we want to sit down, so we're sitting right here.
Threat. Before Catherine's body was found here, the police that were stationed out here said that this area was a threat to the city.
True.
And it was going to be really dangerous here. This is a perfect area for him to dump a body.
And they didn't listen.
They didn't do anything.
Catherine, any other spirits that may be here in the square? My name is Colin.
My name's Connor.
And we're here to speak with you. Can you tell us anything about the man who committed the murder right there? Catherine, can you tell us anything about the man who killed you? Tell us something about the man who killed you.
I need more energy.
You can take whatever energy you want from us through our devices. So Catherine, or any spirits that are here with us, if you have... Go up. To the body spot? Upstairs? If you have an answer to our question... Wow. It's weird. If your answer to our question is yes, go like this. Put your hand right there. That's a weird sequence of events, though. Our words. Go up below.
Don't know what that means.
I don't know.
What?
Is the spirit of Catherine still here in the square? Tired.
Tired.
Are you saying that it's weird it says need more energy and tired? Well, you can take some of the energy from our devices if you want.
Or maybe it's talking about, I
Leave
mean,
this place.
like even, like it happened late at night.
Going home tired from the bar,
Mm-hmm.
pub.
Leave this place.
Is that you?
No.
Thank you for hitting that light. Catherine, if you're here with us, can you grab this red light, please? Like you just did. Just reach out like that. That'll mean yes, you're here with us. So crazy to think of such...
Presentation.
Now we laid the body down.
I was just about to say, like, it's so eerie just thinking about that gruesome murder right there.
How the guy who did it never got in trouble for it.
None of them. It's crazier than I remembered it being. If there is someone here, can you touch that little red light?
We're delighted you're here.
Are you glad that people are still trying to figure out who did this to you?
Can you tell us who you are? Say your name out loud. There's a weird energy here.
Mm-hmm.
It's like strange because this is like really metro London area, but this is a very
40s.
1940s is when he would have died.
And when this whole area was bombed.
Yeah. Do you remember the 40s? The bombings? Is that when Jack the Ripper died?
We're delighted you're here. I'm happy to talk.
Why don't you give me that spirit box? Let's do it while we do these. Alright, so somebody's here. You touch the light. Can you say your name out loud? Did that light just go out? I noticed it got darker right there. What's your name?
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Come in my house.
Fall. That's when all the murders happened. His book's literally called One Autumn in Whitechapel. Catherine, is this you?
That's fine.
I heard. Just to confirm, Catherine, your body was found right there? A Taylor. I didn't like it. Can anybody that's here tell us a description of the man who murdered the woman right here?
James? Was that his name?
Non-human, like a demon?
Or it was like not human, the things that he was doing to these people.
Mm-hmm. What was the killer's name? Nothing at all.
With him.
What was the killer's name?
Did he plan out these murders? Or was it all random?
I heard deathbed.
Was the man they saw talking to Catherine the guy who killed her?
Rich man.
Smell.
Did the killer smoke tobacco? Give us a physical description of the killer. Was he tall, short, stocky, slim? Yeah, I heard that.
I can see you are.
What did he look like?
American.
American?
Yeah.
An American. So...
Before we move on, we have to discuss an infamous unsolved murder case that happened here in America that might be related to Jack the Ripper. The servant girl Annihilator, also called the Midnight Assassin, was an unidentified serial killer active in Austin, Texas during 1884 and 1885. Known for his gruesome murders, the killer claimed the lives of 7 women and 1 man, most of whom were African American servants. The nickname Servant Girl Annihilator originated with writer O. Henry, who referenced the murders in a letter to a friend. These brutal attacks, marked by axe murders and mutilations, have been called one of America's first cases of serial killings, and one possible suspect is Jack the Ripper. So this is one of the most infamous cases in Texas, not only Texas, but American history. It's one of the first serial killers. I used to be under the impression that it was the first serial killer, but it might not be. But these crimes were brutal, and to this day, they're unsolved in Austin. It's like a huge serial killing spree that nobody even knows happened in the first place. Like, if you've seen my documentary about the recent murders in Austin, when I mentioned that there's dark history in the city, there's just so much. I lived there for almost 8 years, and there's so many things like this that have happened there. But who was the servant girl annihilator? Well, the killer targeted victims as they slept, often dragging women outside to mutilate them further. Some of the victims, including 6 women, had a sharp object inserted into their ears. The murders ended in December 1885 with the deaths of 2 white women, Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips, both killed on Christmas Eve. The women's husbands, Moses Hancock and James Phillips, were initially suspected, with Phillips convicted but later acquitted due to a lack of evidence. This led authorities to believe the killings were the work of a single deranged individual rather than isolated domestic incidents. Police arrested over 400 men throughout the investigation, including Phillips and several other suspects, but none were definitively linked to the murders. Local beliefs, particularly within the African American community, held that the killer was a white man with supernatural powers, enabling him to evade detection. There were also rumors of an accomplice or even a gang behind the murders, but despite increased police presence and community patrols, the murderer was never caught, and authorities ultimately believed he had fled the area. It should be noted, a lot of people compare the Servant Girl Annihilator to Jack the Ripper because the Servant Girl Annihilator murders were absolutely brutal. This guy was mutilating these corpses beyond recognition. People saw the bodies. There's a famous quote. Somebody saw one of the bodies of one of the victims and said that it looked like, a chopped up, eaten, savagely ravaged animal corpse. It didn't look human anymore, the way that it was left after this attack. This guy was using an axe. He was cutting off body parts. It was incredibly gruesome. He was even putting bodies up on crucifixes. I mean, it's the craziest story ever. I'd like to do it in an episode of the Paranormal Files just on its own because people don't understand how insanely dark this story is. And he's never been caught. But in 2014, PBS's history detectives identified a suspect, Nathan Elgin, a 19-year-old African-American cook. Elgin, who worked near the crime scenes, was missing a toe, similar to a footprint that was found at one of the scenes linked to the killer. He was killed by police in early 1886 when he tried to assault a girl with a knife, shortly after the final murder, which added weight to the theory of his involvement. But other theories persist, including speculation that the Texas killer and Jack the Ripper are the same person. The first suspect was a cook from Malaysia, the Malaysian cook named Maurice. All but 2 of the servant girl murders occurred close to the hotel where Maurice worked. And when the heat really was put on the servant girl annihilator in Austin, Maurice left town in 1886 to travel by ship to London. This puts him in Austin after the last murder and in London before Jack the Ripper's first murder. And at the time, authorities were looking into Maurice as a possible suspect in the servant girl annihilator murders. I think it's bizarre. This guy's here for the whole servant girl crime scene. He's looked at by authorities. Then he travels to London, and about a year or so later, the Jack the Ripper murders start happening. And they're incredibly similar. The same brutality, the same bloodiness, the same gruesomeness, the same anger and rage, targeting women. I mean, same, places where essentially people were attacked. There's a lot of similarities. Another strong possibility is a cotton merchant from Liverpool who was living in Austin at the time. James Maybrick kept a series of journals in which he spoke of murdering prostitutes. There's even a page that was found after his death in one of his journals that he signed, Jack the Ripper. Not only was Maybrick living in Austin at the time of the servant girl murders, but he also lived in London during Jack the Ripper's killing spree. The murders ended after he died in 1889, most likely poisoned by his own wife. It's another suspect that was never questioned, never brought in, but it's just so interesting. There are so many suspects, there's so much evidence. But now that you understand that Jack the Ripper might have started off in Austin, Jack the Ripper might have killed in America. When I was there in England, I wanted to ask any of the spirits in the area if they knew the Servant Girl Annihilator. I mean, think of the stories. The Servant Girl Annihilator is a white man, supposedly according to the people, who stalks the street of Austin by moonlight, savagely murdering women that he finds out, leaving gruesome bloody messes. He was never caught. He was smart enough to never leave really any clues. Same exact parameters could be applied to Jack the Ripper. Yeah, when I was there in England, I wanted to ask if they had ever heard of the Servant Girl Annihilator, and some of these responses shocked me. Hey everybody, it's Colin here. Thank you for watching today's video. Hello to all the new subscribers and hello to the rest of our beautiful, wonderful, spooky family. As you know, every single week here on the channel, we give away a free gift bag to one lucky viewer of the show. And this week, to enter the contest, all you have to do is like today's video, let's smash that like button, and comment Pure
Jack
Evil
the Ripper
in the comment section below. I'm going to give y'all 10 seconds to do this now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So go comment. You can comment multiple times. It helps the video so much. But anyways, let's get back to today's video. Thank you for listening to my little spiel. I love you guys so much, and stay spooky.
Did this guy ever murder in a different country? In America? Can you tell us clearly? Change the area. Absolutely. All right.
That guy never got caught either. They don't know his name either.
He's called the Malaysian Cook.
Why did nobody stop the man who was talking to Catherine?
Belittling her. Afraid of him. Just by any chance, does the Jack the Ripper case have anything to do with the Servant Girl Annihilator? That sounded like you just screamed. Is Jack the Ripper the Servant Girl Annihilator?
Did Jack kill more people than people have given him credit for?
That's right. I really want to know, was the guy who murdered the women known as Jack the Ripper, did he ever visit Texas in America? Did he ever live in Austin, Texas? I heard bats. Kind of like the Austin bats.
Taboo? And what he was doing was taboo.
Yeah.
To say the least.
So can you say Texas or Austin or Servant Girl if they're related at all? He killed in both places?
Why was Jack so brutal? Was it religious?
He abused the power or something. He's sure romantic.
Listen.
I'm listening. Is Jack the Ripper the Servant Girl Annihilator, or was he Albert?
I guess. Interaction.
tell us if Albert was Jack the Ripper?
Painted eye, painted neck, painted arm. Order. Order like secret societies, religion.
The painted eye.
Red hair.
Red hair.
I wonder what Catherine had.
I think we should do an Estes.
Yeah.
Just like an extended one.
That was me.
We need to pause the video for a moment and discuss the concept that Jack the Ripper might have been a Freemason. This is a very highly controversial theory dealing with the Jack the Ripper murders, but let's examine it because I personally think that there's some interesting nuance to the information here. Among the most infamous theories about Jack the Ripper is the notion that he was connected to Freemasonry, an idea popularized by authors like Stephen Knight. Knight's 1976 book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, suggested that the murders were orchestrated as part of a Masonic cover-up involving high-ranking officials. According to this theory, the victims were silenced because they possessed information that could harm the royal family. Knight's ideas gained traction as he connected elements of the murders with alleged Masonic symbols, weaving a web of ritualistic conspiracy that captivated the public imagination. Central to Knight's theory was the claim that the murder sites and the wounds on the victims carried Masonic symbolism, supposedly mimicking penalties associated with Masonic oaths. For example, certain wounds inflicted on the victims were believed to align with penalties outlined in Masonic ritual, involving the practice of disembowelment and the specific manner in which throats were cut. While some saw these connections as plausible evidence of Masonic influence, many Masonic scholars criticized Knight's interpretation, arguing that he misrepresented Masonic rituals to fit his theory. Joseph Sickert, son of painter Walter Sickert, added credibility to Knight's theory by claiming insider knowledge about a royal conspiracy involving Freemasons. Sickert's story implicated Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's physician, along with several high-ranking officials, who allegedly acted on behalf of Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. And according to Sickert, Prince Albert had secretly married a commoner named Annie Crook, fathering a child with her. When prostitutes in Whitechapel learned of this union, a Masonic faction was allegedly dispatched to eliminate them to protect the throne. Sickert later retracted much of his story, but his initial testimony fueled public intrigue around the Ripper's supposed Masonic ties. Why he retracted that story is still unknown. Another contentious point in the Masonic theory is the so-called Jews graffiti found near one of the crime scenes. Knight, the author, interpreted Jews as a reference to the three ruffians who, in Masonic lore, murdered Hiram Abiff, a central figure in Freemason mythology. When the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the graffiti erased, Knight interpreted this as an attempt to hide evidence of Masonic involvement. I mean, the fact that they had that wording wiped away so quickly after one of the largest clues, the only clue in the Jack the Ripper spree was found in that exact area, I mean, it's odd. But Freemasonry experts have disputed this interpretation, arguing that Jews was not even part of Masonic ritual by 1888. Moreover, Warren's actions were likely intended to prevent anti-Semitic violence, as tensions in Whitechapel were already high. The theory's revival in the 1990s by Melvin Fairclough only deepened the fascination. Melvin built upon Knight's foundation, adding even more elaborate connections between the murders and Masonic practices. He claimed that Mary Kelly's body bore symbols used in Masonic ritual, including a cable tow around her neck and skinned flesh on one leg, which he argued referenced Masonic initiation symbols. Melvin's reliance on speculative connections to Masonic lore led many to dismiss his arguments as sensationalism, but others disagree and say that the links are there, the links are visible, and the links are solid. Critics of the Masonic theory point out that many alleged Masons in the conspiracy, such as Lord Salisbury, were not actually Freemasons. There were actually Masons involved in this case, individuals like Wynne Edwin Baxter, the coroner on 3 of the Ripper cases. But skeptics of the theory claim, why would they risk their high-profile jobs and do all of this and get involved with this sort of a thing? You know, when you go into this world, you understand that people are willing to risk this stuff and these things do happen, so I'm a little bit more receptive to this theory than others are. And there's also a deeper question of motivation behind the theory, which implies that high-ranking officials, possibly including Lord Randolph Churchill and Sir William Gull, were directly involved in the murders. While Victorian society had its fair share of scandal, many find it implausible that such prominent figures would risk their positions for murder. But proponents of this theory dismiss these arguments, suggesting that the public will always underestimate the lengths secretive groups and the elite will go to protect their own. Despite these challenges, the theory that Jack the Ripper was a Freemason remains one of the most alluring in Ripperology, primarily because it taps into long-standing anxieties about secret societies and power. Interestingly, a book was recently published claiming that, once again, Jack the Ripper was a Mason, except this time the author had an actual suspect, and his name is Aaron Kosminsky. Back in 1888, when police constable Edward Watkins discovered Catherine Eddowes' mutilated body in Mitre Square, something curious was allegedly left on Catherine's body by the Ripper, a blood-stained shawl. And this shawl eventually came into the possession of author Russell Edwards, a Ripperologist and proponent of the Freemason theory. Interestingly, after gaining possession of the shawl, Edwards discovered that there was both blood and semen on it, and eventually, when technology became advanced enough, he had the DNA found on the shawl analyzed. In a spooky twist, the DNA came back with 2 matches. Some of the DNA belonged indeed to Catherine Eddowes, the victim, and some belonged to a man named Aaron Kosminsky. And seeing this, Russell Edwards believed he had discovered some conclusive evidence. However, as his investigation went further, he discovered Kosminsky's hidden ties to the Freemasons, which he suggests in his book not only influenced the ritualistic nature of the murders, but shielded Kosminsky from prosecution. Here's a quote from a recently published Daily Mail article discussing the life of suspect Aaron Kosminsky. Born on September 11, 1865, Kosminsky grew up in Kladwa near Warsaw, the youngest of 7 children. When he was just 8 years old, his father died, leaving his then 54-year-old mother to raise him. She remarried, but records suggest the young Aaron may have suffered by his stepfather. In 1882, the family fled to London to escape the anti-Semitism that had been unleashed across Eastern Europe, following the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881. And it was here, in London's East End, that allegedly the young Kosminsky would become a cold-blooded killer. At the time of the Ripper murders, the head of the London Criminal Investigation Department, Dr. Robert Anderson, already suspected Kosminsky to be the perpetrator. Confidential police reports, published in 1894 as the so-called McNaughton Memorandum, revealed police believed Kosminsky to have had a great hatred of women, specifically of the prostitute class, and had strong homicidal tendencies. However, police were wary of accusing a Jewish man at the time. After all, they had no hard evidence, and in the climate of the day, they knew they'd be met with accusations of anti-Semitism from the East End's vocal Jewish population. But that wasn't it. There were ties to Freemasonry. So that's the end of the quote from the article. Very interesting though, right? You see, Aaron Kosminsky's older brother Isaac was a member of the Israel Lodge, a Freemason order for Jewish immigrants located in Britain at the time of the Ripper murders. In his work, Edwards once again posits that the violent mutilations in the Ripper murders echoed Masonic blood oaths, which describe gruesome penalties like having one's throat cut or body dismembered if secrets are revealed. Here's a quote from that same Daily Mail article about the subject. In the ancient Masonic code, the allegorical figure of the Master Mason, Hiram Abif, was murdered by 3 assassins known as the Jews for refusing to give up his secrets. It should be noted that this is spelled the exact same way that the word was spelled that Jack the Ripper left on the wall, Juwes. This fable led to the creation of 3 Masonic blood oaths today, which each give graphic depictions of bodily mutilations. The first oath includes the phrase, "Oh, that my throat had been cut across, my tongue torn out." The second proclaims that my left breast had been torn open and my heart and vitals taken. And the third, that my body had been severed in 2. Comparing these oaths to the Whitechapel murders, Russell Edwards deduced that Jack the Ripper was not randomly mutilating his victims, but carefully carrying out the instructions set in these Masonic oaths. That's the end of the quote from that article. At the end of the day, in his newly published work, Edwards theorizes that Kosminsky, influenced by Masonic symbolism, may have viewed his killings as a dark enactment of these oaths. Furthermore, Edwards claims that the Freemason network, aware of Kosminsky's involvement, orchestrated a cover-up, opting to have him committed to an asylum rather than risk exposing a Jewish Freemason as the Ripper, which might have incited anti-Semitic backlash. Yes, that's true. Yes, you heard it right. Before Aaron could be arrested or brought in for true questioning, he was taken and committed to an insane asylum, which shielded him, allegedly, from prosecution. And so, after 2 decades of research, Russell Edwards took his evidence to the Attorney General, seeking a formal inquest into Kosminsky's guilt, but his request was denied. Nevertheless, using family photos and facial reconstruction technology, Edwards unveiled a composite image of Kosminsky, allowing the public to finally glimpse the face of a man who allegedly was Jack the Ripper. His work, while highly controversial and met with skepticism by some, has reopened discussions around the Ripper case, blending forensic science with conspiracy theories involving one of the most secretive societies in the world, the Freemasons. So, do you think that there's a connection between Jack the Ripper and Freemasonry? I mean, it's very interesting, and I think it's highly bizarre that the last 2 words we got are painted eye and order, especially if you know the symbol of the eye in Freemasonry and, the order. I mean, that's just all of that. I'm sure if I go back and look at other evidence throughout this episode, there's going to be more Masonic stuff. But I personally don't know what to make of all this. Anyways, let's continue investigating.
All right, guys. So right now we are sitting approximately in the exact location where Catherine's body was found. This was a brutal, brutal homicide, as we've talked about already multiple times with our tour guide. Guts and blood everywhere. This was a graphic scene, and just so strange to think that this area is so normal now and you would just have no idea that this woman's terribly, grotesquely disemboweled, mutilated corpse was found here, especially pertaining to Jack the Ripper, arguably one of the world's most famous serial killers. Everybody knows the name. But we're going to do an extended Estes experiment. First, Connor is going to ask the questions, and I'm going to do the answers. Then we're going to stop and switch, and Connor's going to do the answers, and I'm going to ask the questions. I know a lot of people all the time say, why don't you record the Estes session and let's hear it? That's not the point of the Estes method. The Estes method is about forming a human connection to what you're hearing and interpreting these things. That's the whole point, is you're kind of connecting with this energy and actually interpreting it live. Otherwise, if I were to just play you this audio, it would just be doing a spirit box. That's not the point of the experiment. So I hope that that makes some sense to people that comment that. Take that information how you will, but we're just doing our best here and trying. So I'm excited to do that experiment. And without further ado, let's do this, man.
All right, to anybody that's here with us.
Sir.
My name's Connor.
Hey.
This is Colin sitting here in front of me.
The rainy street. That's crazy.
We wanted to ask some questions about the Jack the Ripper case. Is there anything?
Oh, no.
Is there anything you can tell us about this case?
Took the train system.
He used to go on the trains to get away?
He sucked women in.
Yeah,
Thousands of pounds.
we've been told that he lured women with fake money. Is that true?
Clara.
Can you tell us what this man looked like?
40-year-old.
He was 40?
I just swear I just heard 40-year-old and then I heard he was 20 years old. Literally, like that.
So he was a younger...
That's unknown.
Was he tall or was he short?
Lay up.
Can you tell me...
Stand tall.
He was a taller man.
Baby?
Can you tell me what he dressed like? Did he dress...
I've got a wife.
Did he dress more like a common man? Or more distinguished?
He's an animal. Quite dapper. Gentle.
So he did dress up somewhat nice.
Had a knick-knack.
What was the knick-knack?
A watch.
Watch. Was it a fancy watch?
Molly.
Molly.
Just like yesterday. Hate you.
Can you tell me, is Catherine here? The woman who was murdered right here?
In the background. Play ball.
Can you
I
tell
knew him.
That's great.
That was a woman's voice.
I was literally just about to ask if she knew. Why did nobody stop him that night when he saw you talking to him?
Drinks. We was around there. Oh, Brad.
So when he left the scene, what way did he?
It's a wonderful life.
Did he drive or did he run out? How did he get away from the police?
My head hurts. Check the ear.
What do you mean by check the ear? Is there a clue?
Man, I got like tears coming in my eyes for some reason this whole time. All in black.
You saying that's kind of what he was dressed in?
He had finance.
Can you tell me what his name is? If you knew him?
I keep hearing Brad. Oh, Brad.
Who's
No idea at all.
Who's Brad?
Alone. Check his office. Brad again. Brad 3 times.
I wonder who Brad is. I'd like to see the suspect list. Can you tell me about Brad? Did he work in the town?
That's what he told me.
He told you that he worked here.
Said, had a look. You're doing great.
Did you know the other women who were murdered?
He called me beautiful.
Did he lure you away with money?
Only 27. I didn't know him.
You said you did know him and you didn't know him? Were you just not sure? He looked familiar, maybe?
Brad, again. Brad, I literally have no fucking clue. Maybe Bradley?
Was the killer's name Bradley?
He's...
Or is that what he told you his name was, maybe?
He stroked here.
Would he
Williams.
masturbate on the body?
Close by.
So these crimes were very sexual for him?
Police walked. Couldn't help.
Yeah, the police were walking all around you. And they didn't do anything.
But also, he knew him.
So he knew the police, and that's why they didn't stop him?
One guy.
You know, one of the police?
His familiar.
Did anybody see him?
Christmas Day.
Did anybody watch him kill you?
Sailing, sweet sailing. Gaga.
Why
It's
did...
got a really bad smell randomly.
So,
Her drawers.
why did he choose you?
So exciting. Happenstance.
So just, you happened to be there?
Early morning.
Yeah, it did happen in the...
Oh, I just heard a man's voice. Like that. Oh, and then a hello.
Is this the killer that we're talking to now?
How are you two getting along?
Is this Jack that I'm speaking to? Or whatever your name is?
Anything you hear or say, he's part of a bigger problem.
So there's more to the murders than anybody knows?
Check the boat.
What boat?
Hungover. Fish and chips. I was already dead.
Who is already dead?
Me.
You,
He told me it was a pleasure. Ugh. To cut me, and then I heard a ah, like that.
that's very disturbing.
Ugh, oh, and then I was conscious.
So he did it and you're still alive.
For sure, dude.
Oh. Huh.
Sarah?
Who's Sarah? I feel like we've gotten that on a device already.
You know? Holds the key.
So
David Jones, boy.
we need to figure out who Sarah is? And then we'll understand the murder?
Serial boner. The
I don't know about that. Alright, well, do you have anything else you want to tell me?
Yeah, he's still around.
I don't think
Murder.
I don't think that's possible that he'd still be around. It's been quite a while.
All right. This battery. Now Connor's gonna go
Kill
under.
yourself?
Huh?
I just said kill yourself.
Great.
All right.
All right. I really want to know: is there a connection between Austin, Texas, and London, England in this
Feels
case?
good. They're close.
Closely related? What do you mean by that? Because they're pretty far away from each other, actually.
The beating bush. Fuck you.
The beating bush? What does that mean? Did Jack the Ripper pleasure himself after his kill in a bush nearby here?
The school.
Participate.
There's a school right here.
The
What?
heartbreak.
He participate? What? Who participated in what? What do you mean?
Nobody found out.
Yeah, this case has been unsolved.
I went home.
Is this Jack the Ripper?
My name is Charles.
Okay.
Helen.
Now, Charles is an incredibly interesting name to receive here because Charles Allen Lechmere, also known as Charles Allen Cross, was an English carman who became involved in the Jack the Ripper murders after he reportedly found the body of Ann Nichols, the first of Jack's 5 canonical victims. That's right, Charles was the first person to discover a body in the Jack the Ripper case. Ann Nichols, the very first stop on our tour. And interestingly enough, over the years, Charles himself has grown to be regarded by some as a suspect for the killings. So let's talk about him for a second. Charles Allen Lechmere, born in 1849 in Soho, London, was the son of a bootmaker who abandoned the family, leaving his mother to remarry a policeman named Thomas Cross. This connection with his stepfather led Charles to use the surname Cross during an inquest, though he was legally known as Lechmere. A working-class man, Charles worked for the Pickford's Company for over 2 decades and walked to work daily through the streets of Whitechapel, which placed him at or around key locations around the times of the Jack the Ripper murders. His proximity to the sites, combined with details of his testimony, would later make him a suspect of suspicion. The suspicion surrounding Charles's possible identity as Jack the Ripper began in 2000 with Derek Osborne's article, which noted peculiarities in his account during the Ann Nichols inquest. This idea was explored further by other researchers, who examined discrepancies in his statements and actions that night. Charles claimed to have found Ann Nichols' body on his way to work and flagged down another passerby, Robert Paul, to help. However, Charles' story changed slightly when describing how he reported the incident to the police, raising questions about his intentions and whether he might have been covering up his own involvement in the murder. Interest in Charles as a suspect gained traction after the 2014 Channel 5 documentary, Jack the Ripper: The Missing Evidence, where journalist Krister Holmgren and criminologist Gareth Norris highlighted his presence at multiple murder locations and noted that Charles's pattern of movement through Whitechapel was suspicious. Holmgren argued that Charles could have murdered Ann Nichols, heard Paul approaching, and quickly staged the scene to appear as though he'd just discovered the body. Additionally, Charles's decision to give the name Cross, a legally false name, at the inquest added to the intrigue, suggesting that he may have tried to conceal his identity. Additionally, his appearance at the inquest only after Paul's testimony had been published, which allowed him to get his details straight, raised further doubts about his account. Holmgren also utilized geographic profiling, which theorizes that killers operate within familiar but slightly distanced locations from their homes. Charles's route to work aligned with the paths near which many of the Ripper victims were found, including locations which were tied to his own family and past residences where he used to live. This proximity has led some to view him as a more likely suspect, especially since his routes could intersect with the murder scenes on the days and times they occurred. Although there are counter-arguments, such as the geographic profile by criminologist Kim Rossmo that placed the killer's base nearer to Thrall Street, Holmgren's argument for Charles the Killer remains compelling in light of his patterns. But despite these findings, some aspects remain unclear. The murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, occurring on a Sunday, present a challenge to the theory, as it was likely Charles's day off and he would have been away from his work route. However, Elizabeth Stride was killed near Charles's childhood neighborhood and his mother's residence, which could place him in the vicinity that evening. With recent interest and re-examination of the case, Charles continues to be a viable suspect in the Ripper murders, but conclusive proof remains elusive. Now, it's interesting at the time that we didn't connect Charles not only to his connection to the story, but the fact that he was a possible suspect. But some of the evidence you're about to see sounds like somebody who knows something. It sounds like we're talking to somebody who saw something. Could we be getting information from Charles, the man who discovered the very first body in the Jack the Ripper spree? And could Charles himself have been Jack the Ripper? I don't know. Keep that in mind, though, as you watch what I'm about to show you.
Charles and Helen, who are you? Were you just neighbors that saw this stuff happen?
They watched him.
What did Charles and Helen, what can you guys tell me about Jack the Ripper? What did you see? Anything crazy?
Clouded.
Your vision was clouded? Were you kind of drunk that night? Is that what you're saying?
Charles.
Whoa, what the fuck? Who's Charles? There's so many names in this story, I forget all of them. Who's
got back on the tracks?
So Jack...
That one brick wall.
Jack the Ripper took the train after murdering? Is that what you're saying?
Take it off.
So, what's up with the mutilation? Why such hardcore brutality?
5 more stabbed.
Jack the Ripper had 5 more victims than what we know about? I know there's an additional couple, but...
They raped me?
Jack the Ripper did? Is this Catherine?
Who?
The woman who was murdered and found right here. Is this her?
Seems so.
Was the man who murdered Catherine, if this is you, was his name Albert?
Agree.
I'm a legend.
So his name was Albert.
Great.
Did Albert ever mention to you anything about the state Texas?
They got cut.
Human.
The man from last night?
Did the person who murdered you ever say anything about Austin, Texas?
Unlikely.
Not likely.
Wicked one.
Do I scare you?
Faithfully.
No, you don't. What happened to the man who murdered here? Did he go on to live a long life?
I drink alcohol.
So do you not remember a lot about the night that you...
I put them in the grass. Police.
Is this Jack the Ripper? Did Jack the Ripper murder a cop who was onto him? Maybe?
Kept him quiet.
Well, that's fucking crazy. So, yes, Jack the Ripper has another victim and it was a police officer?
The money.
So what compelled this killer to take his first victim's life? Did something just snap and he decided to... What happened?
Scottish.
Oh, that's weird. Scottish.
Finished her.
Was Jack...
I made a mess.
Was the Ripper from...
Next is your daughter.
I don't have a daughter. Was the Ripper from Scotland?
F off.
So it sounds like the Ripper...
You there.
Sounds like the Ripper murdered his first victim and got such a thrill making that mess that he just
Photograph.
became unhinged. Is that true? It was just like a taste of blood and then he needed more and more? It's so creepy to think her body was right here. It was a toy? Like her body was a toy to you? Or to him?
Check near here.
Keeps talking about these bushes and all that stuff. What do you mean check near here? Is there like evidence that was buried somewhere here?
The first 7.
I think there was 7 that they think. But the first. How many murders did Jack the Ripper commit in total? How many people did he kill?
The heads. Tortured.
Joe.
So he liked seeing women in pain?
You were going the wrong way.
I loved it when...
Why did he only kill women? Can you tell me why he only murdered girls?
Stole their life.
But why did he want to steal their life? Was it just like a sick pleasure?
Fucked them.
So before he murdered these girls, would he have sex with them?
No one can prosecute him.
I know they can't because he's never been caught.
He got away.
There you go. So they didn't have DNA evidence back then, but would they have found his semen inside or around these girls and at the crime?
Find in the government.
What do you mean by that?
Goodbye.
Don't go yet. I saw.
15.
What do you mean by 15?
I'm a tap on something.
I felt her. Shaved up.
So was this Albert?
Window.
Oh yeah.
Look at the window. Like he crawled out the window at the one crime scene.
Those were the days.
Was there more evidence?
I cut them down.
I will tap on something. Window. How did this guy find his victims? Did he just randomly find people that were out and about looking vulnerable?
Looked tasty.
He just saw people he was kind of attracted to and decided to kill them because they were vulnerable?
Absolutely.
Tool. What did he do with these tools? What tool? Did he use a tool in specific?
From my shop.
Oh shit, Albert the fucking tool guy. Oh, that's crazy.
Benedict.
Did he... But it was talking earlier about Texas.
Basically.
Was Albert ever... So was it the Servant Girl Annihilator? Are the Servant Girl Annihilator murders connected at all? Maybe.
Right?
They are. Cruelly connected. Was it the same guy?
I won.
Roger.
Don't go down there.
Keeps warning us about going. Don't go where? Is there anything else you want to say?
Fuck off. Anything else?
Adam.
A bunch of men's names all of a sudden. All right, that camera's,
Leave my home.
the camera's about to die, so we tap him out. That camera's about to die. You want to pause it?
Anything good?
Did you pause it?
Yeah. Anything good?
A lot of really good.
Don't mess with me. Tennis.
I don't know, man. It's really weird.
It's strange. I mean, there's a reason why it's never been solved. People are looking in the wrong spots. And I think it's because nobody really knows the right spots to look at. There's no information. I mean, there's only one clue that was ever left. I mean, but even just the suspicions of, like, the police knowing this was going to be a bad area when these murders were happening. And, I mean, a policeman living right here, overlooking this courtyard. And police going back and forth all across these roads, seeing him talking to Catherine. And knowing that it looked weird and not doing anything about it, not pursuing, like, oh, what's going on in this alleyway?
Yeah, he was so bold. It's almost like he knew he would never be caught. But it's f***ing weird. I'm more confused now than when we started. I started off thinking it's probably related to Servant Girl Annihilator. Then our tour guide gave us the incredible information about Albert. Then our investigation talked about possible Servant Girl and Albert. And it's like, yeah, now I really understand why they're never going to solve this thing, because it's been 150 years. Well, it is
Late o'clock.
2:08 in the morning. Should we go back to our hotel?
Yes.
Catherine, we're so sorry what happened to you so long ago if your energy's here.
Really here.
But thank you for speaking with us. Hopefully we can actually find some truth one day for you. But until then, rest easy and yeah. Haunting, man. Jack the Ripper.
It's crazy that it was right here.
Crazy his ass was standing right there. You can just imagine his shadow like standing there.
Can't imagine there's a body laying right here. And people even walking by it and not noticing it.
Yeah, it is.
And it was about this time too. I mean, given there weren't street lights, but
Or this huge building right here. Yeah,
it's crazy the modernization of towns, how it just wipes out history.
Yeah.
Like no mural or anything, like a plaque signifying like some fucked up shit happened here. Nothing.
Well, the mystery of Jack the Ripper continues. Alright.
At the end of the day, Jack the Ripper remains a haunting ghost terrorizing the foggy streets of London late at night. It's been over 130 years since Jack the Ripper ended the life of his final victim. And yet, we're still no closer to the truth than we were back then. We have suspects, many suspects. Suspects like Freemasons, neighbors, local workers, friends and family members of the deceased. And yet, there's no answer. Why? As time goes on, it seems like the mystery of Jack the Ripper grows closer and closer to being permanently doomed as an unsolved mystery. As I said before, a kind of spectral story that stalks the streets of London, still striking fear into the average passerby when they walk by those body locations and flash back to the moment of murder. We tried our best here, and we presented you with some very viable suspects, but at the end of the day, I have no answers. None of us really do. But I do thank you for watching. My name's Colin Browen. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Paranormal Files. We are going to be back next week with our Mark Dutroux documentary, one of the craziest things we've ever released. And I'm so happy we got to do a Jack the Ripper episode. This has been a video I've wanted to make for years. So thank you all for joining us on this journey. Anyways, I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching, and stay spooky.